Next, it's time for Korea Book Club, our weekly segment where we dive into the world of Korean literature and books through notable recent works, both in Korean and in English translations. Joining me this week, we have with us a cultural essayist, Colin Marshall, host of the podcast Colin의 한국, and author of the essay collection 한국 요약 금지. He's here with me in the studio. Colin, hello. It's great to see you again.
Glad to be here, Jung-ho.
Okay, so today you've brought in a book that's Korean in every respect, pretty much, except for the fact that the author is, in fact, English.
He is, and he's an Englishman who's famous indeed here in Korea. Daniel Tudor is his name, and he had a few years here as The Economist's correspondent. And he made his name in 2012 with a book the English-speaking world knows as Korea the Impossible Country, which later came out in Korean translation as 기적을 이룬 나라, 기쁨을 잃은 나라, or The Country That Achieved a Miracle, The Country That Lost Its Happiness. Since then, Tudor's continued to publish books in both English and Korean on subjects ranging from North Korea to loneliness as well. But what I've brought in today is his very first novel, and he's clearly taken pains to avoid any accusations of a lack of ambition as he enters the field of literature. It's called 마지막 왕국, which literally means the last kingdom, although in interviews he's mentioned the preferred English title is The Last Prince. And the prince, at least according to one possible interpretation, is the protagonist Igang, the son of Gojong, Korea's penultimate king.
Wow, so he has forayed into literature then and into historical fiction as well. And not just that, this book is in Korean, although we should point out he wrote the manuscript in English and it was translated by a writer, Ujinha. But still, it is a Korean historical fiction book, and so he will be judged on it by Koreans as well, on both its historical accuracy and literary style. Very ambitious indeed, as you said. Now, you said the protagonist is Igang, the son of Gojong. Listeners who know at least a little of Korean history will recognize those names as belonging to real figures. As you say, Gojong was the second to last king of Korea and Igang was his son, but he never became king himself. So can you give us a bit more historical context? What kept him from the throne?
Well, one major obstacle there was that Igang's mother was not the queen, whom we know as Empress Myeongsong or Queen Min. Rather, he was born to Gojong and a court lady-in-waiting, known as Lady Jang. Until the age of 14, he was actually raised outside the royal palace, not knowing that he was the king's son. And suddenly being moved into Gyeongbokgung in adolescence and having your whole life transformed sounds like a standard fantasy premise, Harry Potter being a popular example. That sort of narrative comes right to mind.
Right.
But in Igang's case, it actually happened to him. And only there do the vicissitudes of his life really begin. The comforts of the palace life don't last long. One night in 1895, during the Japanese attack that culminates in the assassination of Queen Min, he escapes to the home of Horace and Lilias Underwood, the American missionaries who were highly influential in the Korea of the late 19th and early 20th century. And Lilias had been Igang's English tutor. And it's with her help that he makes his way to America, where he's meant to be studying with an eye toward improving his homeland. Alas, as is still sometimes the way, with the children of prominent families sent abroad with perhaps too generous a stipend, he soon loses his way. And that period of his life has done much to shape the received image Koreans have of him as a wastrel, given to troubles with alcohol, women, and the law, to the extent that they know anything about him at all.
Wow, well, Korean history has often been a rich source of material for many novels, films, TV dramas, and whatnot. And you can see that Igang's story is no less dramatic, but then it is quite curious that he's actually not better known more generally, at least as a character, even in historical fiction. Does his relative obscurity have something to do with the dissolution into which he fell?
Well, as this book's title reminds us, Igang and his family are Korea's last royals, and as such, not particularly beloved of the Korean public today. I've had something of a fascination with Gojong personally, Igang's father, but mostly because of his insatiable love for coffee, which made him something of a modern Korean before his time. In fact, there was an assassination attempt that poisoned his coffee. This is a subject touched upon in this novel, but he loved coffee so much, one of his enemies tried to kill him that way. In any case, he's also seen as one of the main rulers responsible for the loss of the country to Japan, a matter about which Igang himself showed scant interest until his encounter with a woman named Kim Ran-sa, also known as Nancy Ha, who becomes one of the most important characters in this novel, 마지막 왕국.
That's quite an unusual name and one that probably won't ring a bell for most listeners. So who is Kim Lan-ha and what did she do to turn Igang's attention to the predicament of colonial Korea?
Well, there's a more widely known woman from this period of Korean history called Yu Kwang-sun, the independence activist who participated in the March 1st movement and became a national martyr as a teenager, known sometimes as Korea's Joan of Arc. Kim Il-sa was her teacher at Ihwa Hakdang, the institution that later became Ihwa Women's University. And Kim Il-sa herself was the first married woman to gain admission to Ihwa Hakdang and also the first Korean woman at all to get a bachelor's degree abroad in the United States. And even there, she was invested in the Korean liberation movement, and as Tudor depicts it in the book, she passes that nationalistic fervor along to the previously directionless Igang.
Yes, it would have been a quite notable development for that movement to bring a royal into one of its ranks. How did Igang distinguish himself as a freedom fighter then?
I don't know that he did that much to distinguish himself, although his failures resonate with the themes of the novel even more in a way than his successes. He gets involved with Korea's shadow government in Shanghai, and even gets involved with an attempt to assassinate the country's then Governor General, Terauchi Masatake. Had that attempt succeeded, popular culture might have made him another An Jung-geun. But in Tudor's telling, its failure marks the beginning of a long, slow decline for Igang, whose existence ends up looking rather contradictory. A Korean freedom fighter who was also decorated by the Japanese imperial government. His son, Yu, also potentially the last prince of the title, was a lieutenant colonel in the Imperial Japanese Army during World War II, and he died in the bombing of Hiroshima. Igang outlived him by a decade, dying in obscurity and poverty in the mid-1950s.
Right, so he lived to see Korea liberated from colonial rule then. The fact that he was also old enough to witness that rule imposed in the first place would be enough, I guess, to make his life story worth hearing to anyone interested in Korean history. But do you have a sense of what attracted Tudor, the writer, to Igang, especially as he is a subject who has been relatively ignored by Koreans, should we say?
Yeah, Daniel Tudor spoke in interviews of first getting inspired when, in his capacity as a journalist, he went to interview Igang's son Lee-sok, who's still around, and whom Koreans of a certain age may remember as the singer of the late 60s hit song Bidulgi Jeep, sort of a one-hit wonder. In fact, Lee-sok has led a life almost as colorful as his father's, and he was the one about whom Tudor originally wanted to write a novel. But it turned out that Igang's life story provided not just a sharper reflection of Korean history, but also the materials for a classic Bildungsroman, a novel of personal growth and development, and even something of a prodigal son type narrative. And as I say, Tudor began his writing career as a reporter, not a novelist, and reporters turned novelists are subject to certain notorious temptations. For example, to dump vast quantities of the information they've painstakingly researched onto the reader without bothering to include any action or drama. And Tudor's talked about how he spent at least 5 years researching Igang's life and historical context, but when it came time to novelize it, he had to keep writing and rewriting the book precisely to excise the feel of nonfiction and imbue the text with the emotional power, unique, potentially, to literature.
Right.
The Korean press has described 마지막 왕국 as a work of 백션, a self-explanatory Konglish word combining fact and fiction, faction.
Okay.
They also tend to describe it as a 벽돌책, or brick book, owing to its length of over 600 pages. And I admit it's a bit intimidating, especially to a non-native Korean reader, to find on the first few of those pages all the relationships, like a chart of the relationships between all the main characters, and then a title page declaring Part 1, 1890 to 1896. But soon you realize how all of Tudor's revision paid off, because the book is a real page-turner, and some Korean readers claim to have read it in a single day. Though I could never do that myself, I can certainly understand what compelled them to do so.
Wow, so that was something I was curious about as well, whether the book works as literature, because Igang's story is fascinating, but whether Tudor effectively moved that story into a novel, I was curious about, but it seems he has very much succeeded in doing so. I think the final question that our listeners in particular would be very interested in is there an English version of this book on the way, perhaps, especially given that Tudor wrote the original manuscript in English, so
Right.
it must be ready to go already, no?
He's talked about it publicly that it should be soon, maybe this year. I don't think we'll have to wait long, in any case, because he already wrote the thing in English.
Right.
And he closely oversaw the translation, of course, that came out here in Korean. But I think he places a lot of weight on both of them being of high quality. And he's also not made any secret of his desire for a film or television adaptation, which would bring this story to a much wider audience. And enthusiasts of English history will no doubt be amused by the fact of a Tudor writing about an E. Not that I've never heard that Daniel Tudor is an actual relation of the House of Tudor, but still, you'll recall that The Tudors was quite a successful TV series. So why not a historical drama about the E dynasty as well?
Right, yes, that would be rather cute, I think.
Indeed.
Certainly. It sounds like Tudor does have big plans then, and that it could be just a matter of time before we see more to come from this book and from Tudor as well. Once again, it's called 마지막 왕국 by Daniel Tudor and translated into Korean by Woo Jin-ha, and it's possibly coming in English as The Last Prince soon as well. Well, that's it for Korea Book Club this week. Colin, thank you for that review. And we'll see you again next time then.
See
Take
you
care.
next time, Jang-ho.
And that's a wrap for today. Join us again tomorrow for more news, views and reviews from Korea. Till then, we hope you have a great day. I've been your host, Kwon Jang-ho. And thank you, as always, for listening. Goodbye.
KBS World Radio